Well, welcome. Thanks very much for coming to the Oxford Energy Seminar. Just to check you're in the right place, this is going to be about sheep rustling in the Outer Hebrides. No, sorry, finding the fuel poor and framing better policy. I'm Robin Morris. I'm convener of the Oxford Energy Network and really looking forward to hearing the latest research in an area that's been a passion of mine personally, having worked with local authority and low carbon community groups on this. And that's about trying to grapple with the question of delivering better support and better targeted support to those in fuel poverty. Just to paraphrase the write-up that Brenda and Tina shared beforehand, last winter, the public purse supported households throughout the country and across Europe with periods of exceptionally high energy prices. In the UK, I think it's about £50 billion of our money that got recycled back into reducing fuel bills for people. And yet, despite that, millions of households still suffered from fuel poverty. So there's something still not working there. So we're delighted to be joined today by Brenda Boardman and Tina Fawcett, who will present an analysis of the experience of British households who have smart prepayment meters fitted, because I think my understanding is really that tends to be an overlooked group in terms of study and opportunity for potential policy and intervention. Brenda Boardman, for those who don't know her, is an emeritus fellow here at the Environmental Change Institute, former head of the Lower Carbon Futures team, and previous co-director of the UK Energy Research Centre. And with her aim to achieve demand reduction, particularly in the built environment, those who know Brenda will attest to her determination to see fuel poverty given appropriate attention. Sometimes determination is the strongest word there. Tina Fawcett is Associate Professor in Energy, also at ECI, and she uses a multidisciplinary approach to understand current patterns of energy use and to identify opportunities and policies for reducing energy use and carbon emissions. So Tina is leading the social research on EDOL, which we heard about last term, and contributes to the EPSRC network for the decarbonisation of, it says here heating and cooling. I think it should have been heating, but maybe sorry. And Tina previously led the policy and governance team for the Centre for Research on Energy Demand Solutions, where she focused on policy for further, faster and more flexible delivery of energy demand reduction. Tina also teaches on one of our flagship courses here, the policy and governance module for the Energy Systems MSc. That's far too much from me. I think it's time to hand over. I don't know who's speaking first. That's the important thing. Please, you can see if you're on the screen.
Okay.
Where your head appears.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I'm just checking out. I'm trying to work out how my notes are coming up, whether I need my glasses or not. I may be doing this a bit, so apologies for that. So Brenda and I are really pleased for this opportunity to present our work. As you'll see from the title page, this is work that we did in association with Cambridge Architectural Research, Jason Palmer and Nicola Terry, who led the quantitative analysis there. So they actually held the data that we're going to be talking about. And at ECI, Uttara Narayan, who's in our team, was another member of the research and writing team here. So that's who did the research. And well, I'll talk briefly, but just to give a bit of context, this was a bit of research. Probably Brenda spoke to the energy company, had a relationship with them. There was an idea that we could do something with their smart meter data. I think we got the agreement probably in something like June, and by the middle of August we published the report. So it was quite a fast piece of work, and that was deliberate because we were trying to influence the policy cycle for this coming winter. So that's what we were trying to do, and that's the context to understand, what we did and the sort of solutions we came up with. But we'll talk a bit more about how it fed into policy when we get towards the end of the talk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce first, say something about prepayment meter users, what we know about them before we started doing this research. Also going to say something about UK policy and particular bits that you're going to need to know about so you can understand where we got to and the different sort of policy proposals we came out with at the end. And then I'll present some of the data. And then Brenda is going to move on to the sort of so what. So what does this mean for policy? What can we do to try and make things better? And Brenda will focus on that and conclude, and then we'll obviously have questions in the usual way. And as we're going through, Brenda may heckle me if I'm not saying quite the right things about the slides. Well, anybody's welcome to heckle. If there's clarification questions as we go through, feel free. But yeah, let's see how we get on. Okay, so this is the overall context and the background. In the light of the fuel, particularly in light of the energy price rises that we saw last winter, and before, there's a clear consensus that fuel poverty is getting wider and deeper. So more people are suffering, and more people are suffering serious harm due to their inability to afford adequate energy services. Not just heating, but everything else that you need energy for in your home: lighting, cooking, communications, all the things that we take for granted to be part of society. And it's a major concern. So as I said, we were working with one particular energy supplier, a company called Utilita. At that point, they were the number 8 energy supplier in terms of customer numbers across the UK, and they had good access to data from smart meters. So they only sell to prepayment meter customers, so people who have to have credit on their meter before they can get any energy. So a lot of people pay by direct debit. You pay the same amount every year. These people are paying what they call pay as you go. Right, so you have to pay in advance of using the energy, and these are smart meters, which means that they are measuring data they're reporting data every half hour on how much energy people are using and other things like whether the smart meter's disconnected. So there's a lot of data there that's available from this system. Utilita had, I think it was 720,000 customers who were on smart meters out of their 760,000 customer base. So that's in the UK, it's about just over half, about 55% of households in general have a smart meter, and the rest have a traditional meter, so non-smart, where somebody has to come and read it. So they're very focused on that. For prepayment meter users, it's a bigger deal if you don't have a smart meter, because that means to top it up, you've got to get credit by either phoning or going to a shop. You can't just do it in the way that you can do it if you've got a smart meter. You can just use your phone, use an app, top it up whenever you've got the money available. And this is what we were trying to do. We were trying to find out how smart prepayment user customers have been affected by price rises and particular bits of government policy, and how to support them in the coming winter, so the winter that we're in now, because as I said, we published this in August. So a brief bit about prepayment meter users. Some countries use quite a lot of prepayment meters. Other countries, they're barely existing. It's hugely varied. South Africa and the UK are the 2 countries where it's most prevalent. In the UK, out of about 28 million households, more than 4 million have one or more prepayment meters. And most people will have both. If they're on prepayment for gas, they'll also be on prepayment for electricity. And it's about 15% of households. So we think it's probably more like 4.5 million than 4, but the numbers change around quite a bit, and a little bit difficult to know exactly what the right number is. Most people who are on prepayment meters have actually chosen this as a method of payment. So there was a representative poll with customers on that payment method, and 86% of them had chosen it. The rest were switched to that method of payment by their energy company because they're in debt. So it's a way of recovering debt from the energy company. Prepayment meter users, they're often not represented in research. So there's a big research project that called the Smart Energy Research Lab. And in that lab, which is of 13,000 customers across the UK tracking their energy use, they've only got 1% of households in that project are prepayment meter users, even though they're about 15% of the population. So they're under-researched. So we've got missing evidence. If we just think briefly before going into the data, so why this 86% of people, why are they having these prepayment meters? The main reasons are the ones here, and this is from people who've talked to people, but also from polls and surveys and so on. It's about budgeting and controlling expenditure. So avoiding going into debt, that's particularly important for some people, or for the minority who are put onto it, it's paying back a debt over a more manageable period. So you get better negotiations with your energy company if they put you onto this. And of course, you get instant feedback. What's the downside? you know, you're exposed to seasonal variations. If it's really cold, you've got to put a lot more money on your meter and you might be on a fixed income. That direct debit payers don't see that, right? You've got higher cost per kilowatt hour per unit of energy. Until recently, that was always the case in Britain. It's recently been sort of, the government's put in place measures to stop that, but that's historically that's been true. So you've paid a penalty for having this type of metering. And the big problem, and a problem we looked at a lot in our research, is that customers who run out of credit self-disconnect from the energy supply. So they run out of credit, the lights go off, can't run their gas heating, everything stops. That's a real problem. And we looked at that a lot in our data about levels of self-disconnection. And it's really important because the thing is the energy companies don't disconnect people anymore. Brenda was pointing back to some research that some figures from the 1970s, and it was 176,000 customers a year were disconnected by their energy company. In 2018, it was 6, right, across the whole of the UK. Six people. So no, 6 households, right? So it does not happen that energy companies disconnect you from the energy supply, but you know they don't need to because you disconnect yourself, right? So disconnection is still a real problem, but it's done differently now. And it's kind of moved out of the realm of public policy where it was felt to be unacceptable for companies to disconnect people into people's own homes. But, you know, despite all these drawbacks, all the evidence is that it remains popular with the people who choose to have it because of this issue about control of finances, control, not going into debt, knowing how to manage on a limited budget. I've covered this slightly already. Self-disconnection, which we're going to talk about. Obviously, it's when people run out of credit on their meters, right? And it has serious implications for mental and physical health. So there's been surveys of people on this method, and 63% of people who had been disconnected in the past year said that it had a negative effect on their mental health. And also nearly half said it had a negative effect on their physical health, as you can well imagine if you were in that situation. Of course, that's true. There's also self-rationing, where people are deliberately limiting their energy uses. So people talked about heat or eat. So they don't necessarily go off supply, but they're using a lot less heat, for example, than they would normally. And we'll see that in the figures. And you can't tell that from smart meter data alone. Well, not really, you know, you can make assumptions. Why is their energy use quite a lot lower than last year? But you don't know. Maybe somebody's moved out of the house. I mean, I think at a population level, we kind of do know, but it's not as obvious as disconnection, which is very black and white. You can see the figures and know what's happening. And if any of you were paying attention to the news this morning, so this was a story today. This is a story from the Citizens Advice, sorry. Looking at what they think is happening this winter, and they say more than 2 million UK prepayment meters users to be cut off from gas or electricity this winter, and that is there. But they're underestimating, because they're saying this is going to be people that are cut off each month this winter. I think from our figures and our definition of self-disconnection, we would come up with a higher figure than this, right? Which will show you, because they're saying it has to happen every month to count. And we were saying, if you look at all disconnections over a year, it would be more like 2/3 of people will disconnect. And this 2 million is slightly less than half, right? So it's a big issue, and they're trying to draw attention to it still. So that's a bit about prepayment meter users and what we know at the moment. I'm now going to move on to a little bit of UK policy, which we need to know. Is it?
Because you've
got to put the key in.
You haven't got to go to the shop like in a legacy prepayment.
Well, I don't know. You can update the. I don't think it is actually, because you update the keys at a shop, don't you? Yeah. Okay, just briefly, we don't need to know very much about the details of this, just to say that there are some ongoing energy-related income support measures around heating. And the main one that we're going to talk about when we talk about our policy is this one, the warm home discount. Because this is given to people on means tested benefits. In other words, it's tending to be poorer people or people with disabilities that are getting this benefit. At the moment, it's £150 a year, or it was in 2022, which is about was about 10% of heating annual energy bills pre-price rise. So that's what people were getting. There's a cold weather payment system, but we're not really going to talk about that. It's something we did in our report, but I think we'll skip over that. And then there's some other payments as well. Yes. So this stayed the same, but there was other payments that the government brought in for that year. Yeah. So this is to your question. So there were additional energy price support in 2022-23, which was for everybody. So the first one that was announced was a energy price cap. I'm going to show a picture in the minute, which does have a small mistake, but I'll explain the mistake. Was limited to £2,500 per year for the average bill payer. That's a lot, but it was a lot less than the market price at that point. And then when that wasn't enough, the government brought in a payment of £400 to everybody over winter 22-23 that came off, either went onto your electricity meter if you had a smart meter, or you got vouchers if you had a traditional prepayment meter, or it was a credit on your electricity bill if you were paid that way. And the people who got the vouchers through the post, the last time we looked at the statistics, 13% of them still hadn't been claimed. So some people still haven't got this money, probably will never get this money. And this, well, I'll show you the graph and then I'll explain the small mistake. So the government introduced this idea of price caps, and it's actually a cap per kilowatt hour, and it was introduced really for market competition reasons, not for social welfare reasons, but it became used as a sort of social welfare tool, I suppose you could say. And I've got the figures here. They announced them, these are quarters of the year. So quarter 1, 2019, so 1st of January to 31st of March. And so there's all the quarters that go across to quarter 1, 2024. And usually they sort of last for 6 months, these price caps. And everybody who's on using the average amount of energy should be paying less than this for their energy bill. Of course, if you have high energy use, you'll pay more, right? So this is based on a X thousand kilowatt hours per household basis. And what happened, this is when we sort of, so quarter 4, so from 1st of October 22, that's when we seen, so the prices started rising significantly here in quarter 2 22, and then even more significantly here. And then, oh my goodness, you know, that's kind of almost £4,500, still very high. And then it sort of started dropping away again somewhat. What the mistake I've done in this graph is this little red line should be, I've got it in the wrong block. So it was here. Actually, my little red line's in the wrong place. So what happened when we got these extremely high prices is this when the 2,500 cap came in, and then the government lowered it even further by adding the £400 on. They're two sort of different ways of solving the same problem. And between these schemes, so there were also other schemes that covered heating oil and payments to businesses and things like that. But if the government's estimated what it has cost just for residential households, just the gas and electricity subsidies, which is what these are, was almost £50 billion. So this area above the red line, that's £50 billion. And that's been spent on all of us, on everybody, most of whom are not, the majority of whom are not in fuel poverty. Okay, right, I better speed up a bit. So moving on. So our research, as we've already said, we're working with this one particular firm. We asked them to have a sample of their customers. They started out with 28,000 customer records. As we'll explain, the numbers went down when they did the data sort of cleaning and the permissions checks and so on. Obviously, this data was all anonymized, and it was only from households who'd given permission for data sharing, right? We had gas and electric smart prepayment meters and EPC, that's energy performance certificate data. So that means we know something about the efficiency of their home and the size of their home. The data was from January 2019 to May 2023. What we know about is we know about energy use, we know about payments onto their meter, we know about self-disconnections, We know whether they're getting this warm home discount. So that means tested benefit I talked about, the £150. And essentially that's kind of an indicator of low income. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's an indicator. And whether they're on this thing called the priority services register. That's not an income related thing. That's to do with whether you're felt to be vulnerable if there's an interruption to the energy supply. So it's households with children under 5. It's all people over retirement age. Yeah, and people with certain disabilities and medical conditions and so on. It's meant to be something that enables the energy companies to focus on you if you need additional information or reconnection fast after a break in supply. Things we don't know about. We don't know about the income. We don't know how many people are living per household. We don't know if the homes are empty. And that's something our sort of data partners spent quite a lot of time making sure we weren't picking up a lot of mistaken, empty home data. And when I said we started out with 28,000 customer records, by the time we got matched EPC data and looked at all the permissions and they'd taken out all the ones where there's a lot of missing data, we were down to about 11,500 as a total over the 4+ years. And then each individual year will have a smaller number of complete records for that year, but we're still in the many thousands of records. And so this is annual energy use, and we split it by gas and electricity. And for each year, we've done a year from, I always get this wrong, from May to April. So we want to get the whole winter together rather than splitting it up between calendar years. And because we wanted to take data out to April 2023, which was pretty hot off the press when we started doing the analysis in June 2023. A lot faster than you can get government data on energy use. And so this is what's happened to the average household in the gas. So you see it's pandemic year, right? Lots more people at home. Bit of pandemic. This is the year with most lockdowns in it, right? Things go slightly back to normal. Energy prices go through the roof. I mean, I'm simplifying, but these are the main things that have happened. And you can see it's had a big effect on gas use. If we compare this year with this year, so the red year with the blue year, it's a 20% drop in gas use per household. That's huge. I mean, that's a huge change, right? Electricity use, we see much less difference. So there's a 3% drop between the red year and the blue year there.
Same temperatures.
Yeah, and they're about the same temperatures. And we've looked at we've looked at the regional distribution of the household and looked at the degree day figures and all of that. These are non-temperature corrected. So that's not a perfect comparison, but it's pretty good because they're not exactly the same temperature. So energy use drops, but expenditure increases. I mean, you'll not be surprised to hear that having seen the graphs. So again, we've got the same years. This time we have got, now I always get the means and the medians mixed up. I think the median is the blue dots and the mean is the black line. What people are paying. So this is gas expenditure. So you can see there was just started out at just over £500 a year, what people were paying. And then it's kind of about £1,000 a year here. And then electricity, these are on the same scale. So it started out a bit higher and has gone up a lot. And then we've got the sort of, so this is sort of what the 10%, this is a sort of bars that show you sort of between 10% and 90% of what the sort of range, it gives you an idea about the range. It just shows you, obviously people are very varied and that variation's got much bigger as prices have gone up. If we look again at winter energy use, this is a sort of slight repeat in a way of what we've just seen, but this is looking at daily energy use. And again, we've got the years going across the bottom. And as you can see, the sort of daily energy use of gas has gone down quite a lot, not quite 20% here. So this is more, I think, 16 or 17%. And then electricity use, again, it's gone down a little, but not nearly as much. So we're seeing much bigger response to gas price rises and electricity price rises. One of the other things we found in this sample is that all our households were meant to be people who are using gas for heating, as most people in the UK do, right? But actually we found some homes that were using almost no gas. This was 7% of our sample, so it's not like 1 or 2. This is hundreds of households in our sample. And so they were using this tiny, tiny amount of gas, and they're using an amount of electricity that is barely more than the people who are using sort of 30, 40 kilowatt hours a day for gas. So they may be using non-metered fuels. We don't know, but it's very concerning, and it's something the company themselves are trying to follow up what's happening to these people. Yes. Well, that's what our assumption is, but I don't think we don't know, do we? Was there anything in the data to say whether this was personal, like a heating one room with an electric heater?
It's got to be less than one room.
Yeah.
Almost less. It's very few hours a day. You just can't. 8.9 kilowatt hours is just so little when it's everything.
Yeah. So I mean, it may be people have got like, paraffin burners that maybe they've got something they can burn some wood, and we don't know, but I mean, it's hard not to be concerned, and we've seen something similar in some of the data as well. Actually, Nick. Don't know. I don't think we asked that. Jason might know, but how many people switched off the gas? Yeah.
But it could be a gas pot.
It could be a gas cooker.
Yeah.
I think that's what we were assuming. This is probably cooking.
People have got electric
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so we've got big data, but we haven't got the contextual data to really sort out what's going on, just that it's worth noting. Okay, so moving on to self-disconnections. So this is the sample of homes that are having disconnections. That is not all homes. And the question is, how many hours of disconnection are they having a year? So again, we've done this separately by gas and electricity. So I'm just going to explain what we think is going on. But again, we haven't asked people. This is what we think. In 1990 to 2019 to 2020, the government introduced new rules for utilities, which said that you've got to offer this idea of friendly credit. So you cannot allow people to self-disconnect over the weekend and in the evenings. So they get sort of additional credit that they then have to pay back. So, and the whole point of that was to reduce self-disconnection. So all energy companies had to do this, and it depends when exactly they brought it in. But Utility, we think, brought it in a bit earlier than was mandated. So we think the reason there's a drop between this year and this year is these new license conditions came in, right? And suddenly there's rather few hours in the day when you can actually self-disconnect, because you can't do it in the evening and you can't do it in the weekend anymore. So if we sort of put that year to one side, and these 3 years are under the same conditions in the terms of they've all got the same license conditions. And what we see is the hours of disconnection for gas are going up massively. Right, so electricity is staying about the same. That's what people are prioritising and staying on supply. And this is what's happening to gas. It's a huge increase in the number of hours that people are off supply. But for the prepayment customers who are having disconnections, so that's not everybody. So no, I think that's the right number. Well, it's by season, so this is over. I think this is done for the 6 months of winter, but then that's when most of it would occur. Well, by season, by year. Yeah. No, I mean it is per year. That's right. So if we look at disconnections per annum, so if we look at, so again, we are. This is both types of energy added together. So this is gas plus electricity. So if we look at per year, everybody who disconnects for more than 5 minutes, which when you look at the data is the same as if you look at or disconnections over 30 minutes and over 5 minutes, they're about the same numbers, right? So it's any disconnection over 5 minutes we've counted, but it's the equivalent, it's the same as anything that lasts over half an hour. So it's not the fumbling for your per mobile type disconnection. 63% of people will suffer some disconnection in any year. Much less likely if you're aged over 65. just as likely if you're on the priority service register, the people who are meant to be vulnerable to loss of supply. And just the same for our people who we think are switching to electricity for heating. And these are the median number of years, so 20 hours, 28, and the number of disconnections per year, 5. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. But yeah, those are the numbers. Shall I do this one, Brenda? Or okay. Okay, final bit of on the policy. If you remember right earlier on, we were saying £400 was given to everybody through this thing that was called the Energy Bill Support Scheme, and that was paid for prepayment, smart prepayment meters. It went as credit onto your meter, and it was paid in 6 lots of £66, I think, and direct debit customers will have seen that coming up as well. So we've got 2 things on our graph. So we've got disconnections, so that's minutes, and we have got credit on the meter, so on the blue axis, which goes up to about £90. So you can see normally people pre this £400, people tended to have about £20 credit on their meter at any time. And then you can see these kind of monthly payments coming in, right? So the blue line. And in response to that additional credit, you can see disconnections coming down. It doesn't go to 0, but it about halves or maybe thirds. So that's the effect. So but we did not see any reduction in the number of disconnections from gas and the period. Yeah, yes, half by time. Yeah. So the policy worked to some extent. I mean, it reduced the impact of self-disconnections, but it doesn't take it down to 0. Right.
And then, oh, yes. Sort out the difference between, because identify self-rationing, which is using less, maybe heating one room or heating for fewer hours. Self-disconnection is when the utility knows that you have no money on your meter. Right, no money whatsoever. And that's when the friendly credit will come in automatically if it's out of hours or if you put in more money. And you know, we just don't know how quickly people can put on money, but we think, you know, as Tina said, 5 minutes seems to be surprisingly for smart meters. It's very quick because all you've got to do is take your app and do it. Right, so what we came up with is the energy cost support scheme, which is our proposal. Please note, we're always talking about households. We're not talking about people, because obviously it's more than that. And as Tina said, we're talking about all energy use, whether it's electricity and gas, whether it's for heating or whether it's for hot water, lighting and appliances. And just to refresh your memories, the cap on Tina's graph was lowest in October 2020, just over £1,000. And at that point, the cap had very slightly been coming down. It is since October 2020, it has gone up. And back then, there were already 3.16 million households in fuel poverty in England alone. So even in October 2020, when it was £1,000, there were still 3 million households unable to keep warm. So it wasn't that the problem didn't exist then, it was just a lot smaller. Now what we've got is the cap now is about £2,000. It's actually 1,928, but the government has altered what they think a typical household uses. One of those little sleights of hand that they do enjoy. So if you went back to the same TDCV, which stands for domestic consumption values, it would be 2023. In other words, the price we have today is double what it was in October 2020. And that's very important in our thinking. And as Tina has said, the government helped with energy costs, but that ended 10 months ago. as if we hadn't still got high prices. And what Tina has shown with our evidence is that fuel poverty is getting worse. If I can just remind you, she said expenditure per household was going up, but consumption was going down. Households were making the most effort they possibly could to keep to the same level of energy services. They just couldn't afford it. Now, a couple of things I want to clarify with you. There is a lot of discussion about the cost of living, and the government is giving a lot of help on cost of living. But that's to 8 million households, and it's via means tested benefits. If you get support through a means tested benefit, it goes into your bank account. You very rarely use much of that for energy. It goes on your food, it goes on your rent, it goes on getting to school, getting to work, uniforms, etc. So what we're very keen to do, and one of our first decisions, was to reduce fuel poverty. We need to get that financial help into people's energy accounts directly and automatically, not claim it. It must be put there. So that is our principle number one in designing our energy cost support scheme. There is then a debate as to whether it should be a lump sum payment or whether it should be via the unit rate. What we didn't realize to start with is that the energy supplier cannot give a lump sum to a legacy prepayment meter. That is somebody who's got a prepayment meter, but it's not yet smart, and it is half of all prepayment meters. So, and with those households, you could only give them a lump sum if you went into the shop or the garage or whatever it is with their card, with them, and said, put £2,000 or £100 or whatever it is on it. So that is why so many of these householders had to have fuel vouchers in the winter of 22-23 for the £400 energy bill support scheme. We think it's about 4,500. We know it's over 4 million, but we think it's about 4.5 million households are on a prepayment meter. Half are still with a legacy payment system, so that's 2.25 million. Of those, we know 13% of vouchers have still not been cashed. That was information that was confirmed in a discussion with the minister about a month ago. That's £130 million not being given to the fuel poor, not claimed by them. But the supplier can remotely alter the unit rate, by which I mean pence per kilowatt hour that they're being charged, on all tariffs, including the standard traditional prepayment meter. That's easy. That's what the supplier has to do. The energy company has to do every time there is a new cap, and it takes them 5 weeks. It's a very organized process. So in 5 weeks, after an announcement by the government, it can be a different rate on your meter, and that is the process that we are following and proposing. We are being a little bit radical in our proposals. We know that, but we think that it could be an improvement. And please remember, as Tina stressed, we were trying desperately to think of a scheme that could be implemented quickly. We were proposing it in August. We wanted it to come in October. Of course, we've not achieved that, but that was what we were aiming to do. If you rely on something like the government identifying the names and addresses of everybody on a means tested benefit, you'll be here 3 years' time waiting for it. So this is something we think every energy supplier could do in 5 weeks or thereabouts. Bit optimistic, but still. So how much money should be given? And the energy bill support scheme put £400 onto electricity bill, and as Tina showed in the last slide, that did halve by time the self-disconnection rate for people on a smart prepayment meter. For electricity alone, there was no change in gas disconnections because they didn't get any money on their gas account. So £400 was not sufficient. So we've suggested it should be £500 for electricity. We can't model that that would be sufficient, but that's what we're aiming at. And most of us have equal gas and electricity bills in terms of money. So we would say that should be the 500 for electricity should be matched by £500 for gas to give £1,000 in total. And as we've both shown you already, there is £1,000 gap between October 2020 and today. So for two reasons, we are working on £1,000. So what we're proposing and suggesting should happen is that the unit rates that were applicable in October 2020 should be used, and that would be halving people's energy bills. And that's 3.5 pence per kilowatt hour for gas, 12.5 pence per kilowatt hour for electricity. And as I've said, there were fuel poor back then, so it would relieve the pressure, but not eliminate fuel poverty. This is infinitely the worst and most difficult debate for everybody to do with fuel poverty. It is tremendously difficult to identify who is fuel poor. It was difficult enough when there were only 3 million. Now that there are probably something in the region of 8 million households, nobody, I mean nobody in this country knows who they are. We don't know their characteristics, we don't know their income groups, we don't know their age, we don't know the properties they live in, we don't know who they are. We just know increasingly that people are suffering. And I know that I've extrapolated somewhat here from the evidence we had on smart prepayment meters to the whole population. But you can challenge me if you like. So what are we doing? And this is, remember that what we're trying to do is find something that the energy company could do quickly. The energy company very definitely knows who's on a prepayment meter. 4.5 million households. And because it's the unit rate, it doesn't matter whether it's legacy or smart. We know that we have got the warm homes discount, which is based, as Tina said, on means tested benefit, but it goes directly to the energy account. So that's another 150 quid. We think it's 3 million households. It was 2.2 last year, but the minister said it was going to be 3. The system isn't very good. 3 will do for the present circumstances. Because we're so worried about the people who are on electricity, what we're suggesting is that where electricity is the main metered fuel, in other words, they've got a meter for gas, they've got a meter for electricity, but most of their consumption is electricity. Where that's the main metered fuel, but they're using less than 4,200 kilowatt hours a year. That is a very small amount of electricity, but for some reason we don't understand, and it's the justification for using it. It is the rate that Ofgem consider that someone on economy 7 would be spending for their electricity bills. Why it should be so low, we're not sure, but we didn't risk too much debate, we used it. So, and we've totally guessed that's 1 million households. The people that are on the priority service register with a medical condition, as Tina said, this is to help people who might be disconnected, for instance, from a flood. We have no policies whatsoever to help them afford energy on a daily basis. So 2/3 of these households were self-disconnecting at some point, despite the fact that they needed to keep the fridge on for the insulin. They needed electricity to charge a wheelchair. They needed electricity for a hoist to get somebody in and out of bed. They needed electricity in order to help this child with very severe asthma if they had an attack. Those households are very poorly served in terms of their daily help. So we've put in policy on that to help them and give them the £1,000 as well. And we've guessed again. So that adds up to 9 million, but we suspect with double counting, That would be about 8 million. Except for the supplier does know without much work those top 3 conditions. That is a little bit more difficult, but the supplier, the energy company, is meant to have really good and detailed conditions as to why this household is on the PSR. So they should be able to pick out those with a medical condition. There's lots of ifs and buts in that, but that's where we are. So that is what we're now proposing. As I said, it's the lower electricity rate, the lower gas rate. It should reduce the amount that a typical household has to pay by about £1,000. It goes directly into the energy account, so it helps with fuel costs. And we're aiming for 8 million households times 1,000, which is £8 billion. Now, it just so happens there's a very fortunate amount of £8 billion sitting in the government's coffers. Whoops, sorry. Here. The government thought that goes back to Tina's graph with the blue bars and that little red line and the energy price guarantee. The government thought a year ago that the energy price guarantee was going to need to be much higher than it has been. They put £12 billion aside for the energy price guarantee, and they've probably used at the most 4 billion. And that is a Hansard statement. So there's 8 billion sitting in the account to be used by the end of March. But of course, that was what we were aiming at. We had a scheme, we had the money, we knew how to do it. It could have been done. And what happened? Nothing. I'll come to that a bit in a moment. What we know for this coming winter, and this is where, in a way, the debate is now, we need to improve the targeting. I don't know how anybody's going to improve it without actually implementing it. There might be some ways in which people can do more analysis. But if we're going to have the energy cost support scheme that we're proposing, it would be comforting to know it's better targeted. All of that is to do with keeping the price high and supporting, through income support, the households that are suffering. There has been far, far, far too little debate about getting the price down. That actually, the energy that comes from the electricity that comes from renewable sources, particularly for those that know about it through something called the contracts of difference, is much cheaper than we are paying at the moment. So if there was a market for the renewables that was separate from the market for fossil fuels for electricity, called the green power pool, and that's being advocated and researched very thoroughly by Michael Grob and his team at UCL, we could have cheaper electricity. It requires some reform of the system, but it wouldn't be too difficult to do because much of that electricity is already bought by the government. So that would give us cheap green electricity, and it should be given to the fuel poor. In addition to which, you would particularly insulate the homes of the fuel poor, put them on all electricity by giving them a heat pump, take them off gas, and then each fuel poor household would only be using cheap electricity. Fuel poverty would be under control. There's a few bits of policy in this slide, but that's just to summarize what we're proposing, both in the present and the long term. Now, we did try enormously hard, and I think this is very interesting and salutary for a group of academics. Some of you are a bit more than academics, but others certainly are. As Tina said, we got the data and cleaned it up by early June 2023. Our colleagues at Cambridge Architectural Research worked phenomenally hard. So even by the 28th of June, we were in a position to give an interview to Utility Week, which is read very extensively by the energy companies. We had a preliminary report by the 30th of June, and I was on Money Box on a Saturday morning telling people about it. We were trying hard to get the information to the MPs before the summer recess. We wanted them before the summer recess to say, we want this, we're going to legislate for it, we're going to demand it from the government, we're going to help the fuel poor this coming winter. So we did a report and a press release on the 17th of July, and I think Tina was in the Utility Week again. We got Caroline Lucas, the lovely Caroline Lucas, to ask a parliamentary question. And on the 23rd of August, we submitted a refined version of our proposals to the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee. So we gave them written evidence. They didn't, unfortunately, ask us to give oral evidence, which I'd hoped they would, but they chose not to. We gave a press release, put out a press release on the 24th of August. It's not a good idea, members of the ECI, to put out a press release in August. Tina and I did it entirely on our own. Both of the two people that could have helped us with a press release were on holiday. So not surprisingly, we didn't have much response. In fact, we had no response. And on the 26th of August, we published both a small Scottish version and this English report, which we've been telling you about, and publicised it. So it was a busy summer. So we continued, despite the fact that nobody was responding at all with any policy support or any inclination or indication that they were interested in what we were doing. On the 5th of October, I was a part of a group from the End Fuel Poverty Coalition to meet the Minister for Fuel Poverty, Amanda Soloway, and made sure she got our report. On 16th of October, we presented to the Committee on Fuel Poverty a presentation much like you've seen today. On the 9th of November, we talked to the Catapult Energy Group together with UCL and Michael Grubb, because they're quite influential in policy debates. By the 15th of November, the End Fuel Poverty Coalition, my wonderful colleagues on that, were at least 34 organisations, all of whom campaign for different aspects of fuel poverty. They adopted our proposals as an emergency tariff for this winter. So we had a lot of people like Citizens Advice, UK, NEA, etc., supporting us. On the 16th of November, over a month after we talked to them, the Committee on Fuel Poverty managed to write to the Minister supporting our work, considering it was so urgent that it took a month to do it. We then had a debate at the Fuel Poverty Research Network, which is a group of academics researching fuel poverty rather than the coalition, which is the activists. A debate on fixing fuel poverty versus a social tariff versus a reverse block tariff versus a free allowance. There is a huge amount of debate going on as to what should happen. I regret to say 90% of the debate is shuffling the existing units, giving some a bit off, some a bit free, and some a bit more costly, and rather than focusing on reducing the price. 30th of November, I was part of a call with Ofgem, explained the Green Power Pool, and Jonathan Brearley, the head of Ofgem, did seem to be quite interested, but we've not heard anything back. And I think it's true to say that since then, we've just about given up. Not actually in our heads, but it was just been a fairly exhausting 6 months since we got the data, processing it and trying to get anyone to do you want to do this?
Yeah, so just to conclude then, so Brenda's just told you the impact story, which hasn't been that much impact yet, arguably, but I think, you know, what our research has shown is, you know, that there has been insufficient research and policy attention paid to prepayment meter users, and this is, we're trying to, you know, what we're doing is obviously mostly we focused on policy impact, but it's also about the research. And so by doing this research, we're increasing the evidence base, and we're going to build on this. So we're about to submit a journal paper, sort of conference papers, and try and build the academic, the evidence base for saying, well, what is the experience, what really happened, and what and therefore what do we need to do about it. Findings from this research are going to inform the design of the sample for we talked about the smart energy meter, smart energy research lab. There's a follow-on project that we're involved with called the Energy Demand Observatory and Laboratory, and we're going to use this to really focus on getting a sample that represents prepayment meter users as well, so that their experience gets carried through into research and policy. I mean, I think what you've just heard is that, I mean, this is not a surprise really, that, a good evidence-based policy proposal, even with support of all the stakeholders of like the activist coalition, the research coalition, is not necessarily adopted by government. Surprise, so a different government might have made a different decision, and obviously politics matters. And obviously we were talking about £8 million. It's not, it's a huge amount of money, of course. We weren't expecting them to just go, oh yes, you said that, we'll spend 8 billion, but it would have been nice to have more response, clearly. And I think, as Brenda said, we can improve these. I mean, maybe our job to do is try to refine it a bit. So when we've got, if there's another price crisis, or to improve the current situation with fuel poverty, perhaps we can make a bigger case about how smart meter data and using these mechanisms of paying through utilities can actually open up more options to take better action on reducing the impact of high prices and fuel poverty. So I don't think we've finished, but we are having a bit of a pause in terms of the trying to change things for this winter, but not in terms of trying to get all this evidence understood, accepted, and then get other people to join in with doing more of this sort of stuff to build a bigger voice and bigger evidence to take action in future. So that's us.
Thank you very much indeed, Tina and Brenda. I apologise that we didn't get you to speak earlier in the winter, because then obviously that would have influenced policy. Maybe it would have been 3 energy secretaries earlier. I have a very quick question, which is, if you frame this as a social policy, not an energy policy, would you be able to find a more receptive audience in some other part of government?
I would personally refuse to do that, because it implies that the energy companies have no responsibilities for their poorest customers, and I would object to that very strongly.
I can ask you a technical question, which you may well have not covered because of the time, but
the DWP wouldn't be receptive.
No, that's fine. So my understanding, if you're a low energy user, actually it's the standing charges that hit you hardest proportionally. And now we've seen energy companies going bust, so the energy company debt is being added. The upgrade to energy networks, which normally helps people who are not really the target group, all being added to a standing charge. But what you've described here as a unit cost for energy, not a standing charge. So disproportionately, is there something we can say about, is it fair to apply a standing charge equally across all meter points?
There is a big discussion going on about standing charges led by Ofgem at the moment. And as you say, there are certain things added to it totally unfairly or totally to be debated. I mean, and the government is doing less and less. I mean, I was on a phone call this morning, a Zoom this morning, and the government has done 2 things just recently. It is refusing to give the help that it was giving to people who had oil central heating. And it is refusing to continue with a thing called the Household Support Fund, which helped people if, for instance, their boiler broke down and there wasn't a scheme. So the way in which help is being diminished is continuing, and the way in which costs are going up is continuing. I mean, there's £3 billion of debt from low income households with the energy companies. There's £3 billion out there. How does that get paid? What they're going to do, what they're suggesting, is that all of us pay it. That we increase fuel poverty for the people that are still self-disconnected by adding on the debts of those that are in trouble. And 31 companies went bankrupt. I honestly, I go apoplectic on this.
That's the question.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe I should open to some
Oh,
audience.
yeah, but no,
questions.
I'll just finish on this.
Yeah.
31 companies went bankrupt. The cost of that is phenomenal. It's about £70 for every one of us. Should we really pay because the regulator had such a poor system that 31 companies set up and then went bankrupt? Who should pay? I mean, if Woolworths goes bankrupt or somebody, we don't expect to pay through M&S, do we? Why should I pay through
Oh, I
Octopus?
thought that explained the pricing.
Anyway,
So Nick,
Nick,
please,
yes.
People get money for all sorts of different ways, but you say, if I understand it, that the money they receive mainly goes on food and clothes and not on anything. So one of the arguments that the government might say, well, we're giving them money, it's up to them to choose what they spend it on. So, but one of the things that people may not realise is that they know they have to have food, they know they have to have clothes. But is it the case they don't realise that energy is really damaging if they get cold and stuff like this? So that in a sense you can make a public health argument for it. Because I mean, just like we gave milk to people years ago, because people went and realised that they needed to do this. That people need energy in order to, as you said, mental health, but also physical health. Absolutely. So is there an argument therefore to go to the Department of Health to say that, you know, for the well-being of the country, there ought to be a minimum amount of energy?
Well, the minimum amount of energy comes back to, should we all have a free allowance? That is one of the debates. And if we all had a free allowance, who would pay it? And it gets extraordinarily difficult to know, you know, if you're an all-electric house, for instance, you've just put in an air source heat, which I know they can. Oh, not an air source, but anyway, a heat pump. You know, those households will have high electricity bills. So if they only get etc. This is very difficult argument. But going back to your health thing, I've wanted for some time to contact, I haven't done it, probably should, contact all of the chairs of the various health groups, the GPs, the nurses, the A&E, the whoever's, and say, look, you've got more people coming into A&E, you've got more people coming into hospital, and that's partly because of this. But I haven't done it. And it's quite difficult to get them all organised about rather a lot of things. I mean, we've all got rather a lot of things.
I think part of the challenge to
Just
Brenda.
go back to your cost of living. The government accepts that the cost of living and energy costs are separate by giving us the energy bill support. So we're building, that's why we call it the energy cost support.
Brenda, I was just going to say there are more admissions to hospital now into malnutrition as well. So we're even seeing cutting back on food expenditure.
Oh, absolutely.
We've got a question at the back, lady at the back.
I volunteer at a food distribution organisation, and actually one of the things that we talk about a lot is that maybe less so for prepaid meters, but if energy bills are coming out of your account, you might know that you have to pay them. It's very hard to stop paying them, but you can cut back, and people often do cut back on food. What we found during the time of increased energy, there was an increasing number of people asking for food that didn't need to be cooked, specifically fruit and veg. So the kind of catchy phrase is choosing between heating and eating. We found that there were a lot of people who couldn't afford to do either.
Yes.
The other point is very quickly, and I think it was done by Catapult, who you mentioned, but there was the warmth by prescription trial.
Yeah.
Yes.
For people with, I think it was certain kinds of respiratory illness. And I believe that the results of that were that it was about 1/10 of the cost of what would be an NHS bills costs to pay off people's energy debts, ensure that they had enough energy to adequately heat their homes and also to insulate. So we know that there are cost savings, at least for people who are with certain kinds of health conditions, if they are warm.
Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other, Nick?
Yeah. Do you know anything about the income levels and other characteristics of people on prepayments? The reason for asking is that UCL have now the smart meter lab published there,
They have, yeah.
and that shows about a 10% reduction in gas use across the
Yeah, that's
10% in electricity, which
They
is
did.
actually quite different from.
it is quite
Yeah,
different.
obviously.
Yeah, it is. No, I've been so no, we don't know what their income levels are. We know that the numbers on warm home discount are 3 times the level of prevalence in the general population, right? So that's an indication. We know, we know other things about our samples. So they live in smaller homes than average, but they live in homes that are averagely well insulated. They're younger than average, so they're likely to have higher occupation level. Higher numbers per household because they're the right age for there to be children in the household. So there's a few things about our sample that are different. And UCL sample, they're slightly wealthier than average. In other ways, I think they're and they haven't got prepayment meter users in their sample, only 1%. And they also use a different method. So their comparison was not, so we were comparing 2 years of actual data. They did a projection of what it should have been if, so you've got to rely on your model being right to know that your 10%, whatever they got, is like 10% gas reduction and 8% or 8 point something percent electricity reduction figures are right.
They're quite a huge amount of work.
Yeah, I'm not saying they're necessarily wrong. I'm just saying we're using different methods. So it's not surprising. But it is a bit surprising that they're seeing so much drop in electricity. And I
think it does have implications for your recommendation on supporting having a low price for everybody on prepayment meters. You don't need to be a genius to work out that that's a massive incentive to pick sort of prepayment.
Yeah,
so
indeed.
There's no way government ever.
No, but this was an emergency thing for one winter, of course. We were saying you can do this really fast. People are not really fast all going to get prepayment meters fitted.
I quite like.
You just expand on why the government wouldn't want more people on prepayment meters.
It wouldn't want to subsidise, and I don't think you would want the government to subsidise rich people to move to prepayment meters just so they could offer energy.
Be a good headline though, wouldn't it? Instead of energy companies force people to fit payment meters, it would be energy companies have a huge queue of people waiting for them fitted. Not what we need to do. Sorry, we have.
Yeah.
Is it Roger? Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I've heard Brenda say that 30 years ago, and really sadly, it's not changed all that much.
I have been very effective, have I?
I've been working in the same industry, so we're equally guilty. But the real question I'm asking with one of your specific recommendations is once again about improving insulation for homes. And I just wonder what's gone wrong. Why there's been so many schemes, the you mentioned, who have tried to do that. Why is that still a problem? And how do you think we can act? I agree it still needs to be done, but how can we do it?
One of the difficulties is this whole debate over the last 3 or 4 years has completely focused on running costs. And it's using, as we showed, 50 billion quid. And that's taking away any chance whatsoever of the government finding 50 billion quid to spend on energy efficiency improvements. I think the real answer is that energy efficiency improvements are a lot more difficult than perhaps most policymakers and maybe even some researchers really believe.
And I guess there's also the point about the fact that if somebody's previously in a cold house and spending up to the maximum level they can spend, then you put in the insulation in, they have a marginally warmer house, but they're still spending the same amount of money. So therefore they're taking benefit quite considerably in comfort. Lower bills as well. But that's
right. That's absolutely right. But in a way, what we've got at the moment is because of all this deprivation, it's been wonderful for climate change because people's consumption is low. So their carbon emission.
So, in terms of policy engagement, answers on a postcard, please. I think you've tried so many ways, and the message should be something that people are listening to. But I think if that's okay, we're going to say thank you again to Tina and Brenda. And a quick message. So week 3 next week will be a change from the normal. It will be over at Holywell House, which is in Oseney Mead. That's because we're running a seminar in conjunction with the Energy Systems MSc down there. We'll hear from 2 alumni. One is Laurence Pianturier, if I pronounce it correctly, looking at performance gap, looking at energy consumption in higher education buildings, and also Colin Kinghorn, who's looking at green hydrogen applications in South Africa. The main draw is there may be pizza. So thanks again. It is. So if you can manage somehow to get to the other side of the station, which in its own is a big enough task, you reach the traffic lights. If you take a left turn, you have to just keep going and keep going. And when you think you're not there, keep going, turn right, and that's Holywell House. But you could use a map, which is also another game. Anyway, everyone have a good evening. Thanks very much indeed.